Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Danae Tibbs-Shirani and today I'm joined by the BNZ Chair in Business in Asia, Siah Hwee Ang. Thanks for coming in, Siah.
Thanks again.
Look, today I'd actually like to discuss first two things. The first thing being, I'd sort of like to hear your views on the restrictions the Chinese government has put on people bringing capital out of China. And secondly, I'd like to bring the discussion back to New Zealand and talk about the way New Zealand businesses are, I guess, responding to the way our population is changing due to migration.
Okay, let me try to tackle those different questions separately. So the first one, now capital sort of outflow from China, right? So when we say capital outflow, I see them as two groups. So we have to look at two groups of people. So the first is relating to individuals, right? High net worth individuals that has a lot of savings or, sort of a lot of money somewhere, right? To which I think they are trying to buy things across the board, as in, globally, including New Zealand, of course, right? The second group of people that we are referring to are organizations to which then they are thinking about investments overseas. Now, let's come back to the first group. Now, if we might just try to recall back on the kind of focus that China is trying to move itself towards is a consumption-based economy. Now, consumption-based economies is on the assumption that people have the spending power, right, to do it. And in China, it's a high savings market, so it's not really a sort of individuals trying to, swipe their credit cards away despite the fact that they haven't earned the money kind of economy. So it's an economy whereby my last recollection about how much money is in the banks is that there's about 28 trillion US dollars worth of savings in the banks. Right, now this is the kind of money that we are talking about that China government is trying to release, right, to which I think most of these monies are residing with the older generation, right? People who are actually the kind of people who will come and invest in houses and so on for their children, right? Most of the younger generation doesn't have that spending power at this point, but a lot of older generation has a lot of savings inside the banks. Now, if you think about it this way, right, it's almost like a substitution effect, right? So if we have individuals that wants to have so much savings and then in the end they just try to bring all the money out at one go from the banks, right? It's actually bad news for the consumption-based economy because the consumption-based economy says that ideally the $10 million that they are about to sort of find a way to leave China is actually spent in China, right? So actually boost up the domestic consumption level and henceforth building up a lot of internal capabilities of Chinese organizations, right?
Sure.
Okay, so that part is extremely important to understand. And the second group of companies, right, that we are talking about are those that are already companies in China that basically have to decide, that they have to try to borrow so that they can invest. Now, that group, to be honest, is actually encouraged by the Chinese government, right? Now, that group is different. There are not many of them who are doing that, but you might notice that a lot of them who are actually overseas are actually well supported by the government, right? And they are normally government-related or government-linked companies. Now, and these are the companies that we are talking about foreign acquisitions kind of movement or foreign investments kind of movements. Now, that kind of movements is highly encouraged in China because as China tries to push itself to the global stage, what they actually need is a global presence, right? And global presence can only be there with the umbrella under organizations as opposed to China's investment, right? A country don't really invest in other countries in that way. So some of these organizations acts as a way for China to build its image globally, and henceforth they are called Chinese multinationals, right? So there are a bit of two groups of individuals or organizations that we are talking about. One is more encouraged, the other one is actually less encouraged for different reasons. And as a result of that, you might actually see that there are certain restrictions. Now, I don't have the specifics of the restrictions, but the restriction is tightening up because they are worried that, the real savings are actually moving out as opposed to, foreign investments, which comes with companies to which they have to borrow, which I think the Chinese government wouldn't mind actually letting them the money to go for any foreign acquisition. That's why you see bigger and bigger foreign acquisitions worldwide, including the latest one, which is a bid for $43 billion US dollars for Syngenta, right, from Chinese chemicals.
Right. See, if we talk about, probably relates more to the first group, so this is the group of savers. Obviously, these are the people that have, brought their savings to New Zealand and bought property. We've seen Chinese buyers in the Auckland property market ease back a little bit, and that talk is that it's largely due to these restrictions, but also due to the rules that have been put in place in New Zealand last year. Do you think the Chinese government will continue tightening its restrictions, which will in turn affect the amount of capital Chinese people bring into the property market here, or do you think that we'll sort of continue seeing the same sorts of trends we have been seeing?
I think there's only so much restrictions that they can impose to the extent that you basically argue, look, money is not leaving the country. But in an economy like China, it's not like the case of like the Iran sanction or whatever, that money is not be able to leave the country. It's like if you are an economy like China who wants to call itself hopefully a market status, right, because of its increasing sort of GDP per capita, right, income, the last thing you need is to say that money can't leave China, right? So there's only so much restrictions that they can put, and I suspect that that's probably what they have been putting there, which of course then the process as usual will be very confusing, which means that at the initial stage, right, both sides, from the Chinese side and from the New Zealand side, they will try to iron out certain things as they move along, right? So some of these kind of investments are probably seen as a case-by-case basis. And then over time, when you have enough cases, then you can have a better system, I hope, right, to be able to say, okay, these are straightforward cases to go, these are straightforward cases to come in from our perspective.
Okay, all right. Okay, and see, just the second thing I wanted to talk about was, the impact of not just Chinese, but Asian migrants in New Zealand. Obviously, this is a huge market, and, the banks and insurance companies, big corporates, I believe, are really capitalising on the value of this market. They seem to be, they have teams dedicated to marketing and targeting their products just at this sector of society. They're using Chinese social media platforms and all that to market their products and services. Do you think, more widely speaking, New Zealand businesses have really cottoned on to the fact that our, market has changed so much here?
Now, generically or broadly speaking, right, I think you can actually observe some organizations are doing that in terms of saying, okay, now we are talking about a new set of people living in this country, residents or citizens and so on. Now, then of course you have to cater to them, right? Your market changes. But in effect, what I actually see, right, broadly speaking again, right, is that a lot of these kind of businesses are actually done by Asians or Chinese. So basically, maybe because of the fact that they understand the taste, the spending patterns, and so on and so forth, right? So for example, it's interesting in a session that we did for Trans-Tasman yesterday, right? There was a discussion of one of the NZTE's new initiative of actually, getting our organizations in New Zealand to go into Chinese consumers' home to see what kind of spending habits that they have, what they stock up and what they don't stock up and so on, right? I mean, those kind of things are important, but in the context of Asian migrants here, right, what I'm trying to say is that basically then the Asians who are here actually know what they want. And so most of these businesses that are being set up are Chinese-owned, Asian-owned, and because they know exactly what are the spending patterns, right, of these kind of Asian migrants. And in particular, if we are talking about migrants, then the first thing they want is to find something that they are familiar with, right? And I think the market is well exploited by a lot of Asian entrepreneurs here, but less so of New Zealand organizations broadly.
So obviously huge opportunities, would you say, for, Kiwi-owned businesses to, I guess, tap into this market? Yeah,
there's huge opportunities there, right? Because they bring with them certain expectation. It's like if you start to treat them as a different customer segment, right, then you have to understand exactly what they need, right, as opposed to actually what we normally do here, right? It will be an interesting one. It's almost like you bring yourself to Asia, except that you are not in Asia. Right, literally, the Asia is coming here to us, so we have to understand the difference, right? So, and for that, in a related note, let's talk about the cruise ship that is always at our borders, right? In Wellington and in Auckland as well, throughout the whole summer, right? So we have a lot of Asian tourists around, and you might also notice that the Asian tourists tends to either go for luxury goods like your Gucci or Louis Vuitton on Queen Street, or otherwise you might actually see them in Chinese restaurants, right, or other sort of Chinese related products area to which they try to find some cheaper deals that is sort of coming out of the Western world that they can feel a bit more familiar with. Now, it is that kind of business that you see that a lot of these tourist sort of stores are actually set up by Chinese or Asian as well, right? If you actually count across Queen Street, you will notice that, right? Most of them are either Chinese or Asian owned. And that is an interesting example of what I've just said, right? About, understanding the consumers, right? And basically getting them to actually spend the dollar here. And it's well known that basically in terms of expenditure by tourists overseas, right, we are actually quite way below compared to how much the Chinese or Asian tourists spend in the US or in the Canada. We are definitely way less. So they literally don't spend enough money here.
Right, that's interesting.
And that's what actually we want to see, right? But also to the extent that, I'm not trying to be biased here, but if you're talking about New Zealand organizations, then you want them to spend the money and contribute to the New Zealand organizations, right? As opposed to Chinese entrepreneurs, and actually the money might not stay in New Zealand, right?
And that might come down to actually just employing more Asian staff, who actually understand this market.
Yeah, or Asia-savvy staff, right, to be a bit more realistic about it. And I suspect that we still have enough sort of Kiwi youngsters who actually have some exposure to Asian cultures and so on. And if they are Asian-savvy, right, they are actually good for that business, right? Now, it's the same, I would say, about the education sector that I'm in, right? So, we have a lot of Asian migrants here and, Asian studying in the university, increasingly more and more international students in all the universities across the country. A lot of them can't find jobs after that. I'm not promoting that we should all let them stay, but I think there's a certain kind of bond and linkages that can be made before they actually eventually leave the country, because those are the kind of linkages that we want to know. Of course, there's a bit of a pushback as to, maybe they don't know the culture, so, it's not the ideal state to try to hire someone that don't think like us. But let's think about this. For any organizations that is thinking about internationalization or dealing with Asian business or trying to conduct business in Asia, actually, these are the kind of people that you want, because actually it allows you to learn about their home country without you having to spend money there. But actually be able to understand why is it that we are thinking differently, and what do you think the Chinese consumer wants or the Asian consumer wants. Like, it's actually very cheap learning in my view.
Sure,
right?
It's a free resource.
Free resources that they are here. You don't have to spend money to go there to understand it, right?
Sure. All right. We'll see. Interesting thoughts. I think we better leave it at that. But a few interesting things for us to think about. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Janine.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'm Janae Tibbs-Sharani here at interest.co.nz.